Reddrop, former SPAD, special advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. Oscar, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon. How are you doing, Ian?
Good. Nice to have you with us. How is Boris these days, by the way? Are you still in touch?
Not as much as we previously were, although it was quite an intense period of time, admittedly, when he was in number 10. So, yeah, I think, you know what? I think he's actually leaning into and probably relaxing into his role of, commenting mainly, I would say, on global issues. I think he wants to stay out of the kind of UK politics, Punch and Judy stuff as much as possible. But, when I've seen interviews with him recently, he feels a little bit like the glint behind his eye. That X Factor Boris has kind of come back a little bit, actually.
Do you think this is... Yeah, I was about to say... Sorry to interject, Oscar. I was about to say, do you think his métier was always in this field rather than as Prime... So, a commentator once said, as I'm sure you'll remember, that Boris liked the idea of becoming the Prime Minister. He liked the idea of saying he was the Prime Minister. He just didn't like the bit in between. Is that true or is that unfair?
I think, look, it won't surprise listeners and viewers that the devil in the detail sometimes perhaps escaped someone like Boris. But what he did have and what he did enjoy was making bold, big, decisive decisions and ambition and that kind of excitement that I think sometimes is lacking in our politics at the moment. And, you remember that cliche that you saw ministers come on the airwaves and say almost daily when they were defending Boris, which was, he got the big calls right. Yes, but he got the big calls right. And I think, that extends to stuff like Ukraine, the vaccine, and that decisiveness, that kind of, why can't we do more quicker now, which is a real contrast to the leadership we have at the moment.
Yeah, of course, the one thing Boris Johnson did brilliantly was he could sell optimism like no one else. And that's not I mean, people often would talk about sort of snake oil salesmen, about politicians who can do that. But actually, I think it's quite a rare quality. I think it's a really important quality to be able to instill confidence and sunny uplands into the minds of the people that you want to vote for you.
Absolutely. And you forget as well, charisma and identity really can dictate the progress of a government. And I think that's kind of the problem that we have with the Labour government at the moment, is it doesn't have an agenda. People scoffed, in some Conservative circles, but certainly on the Labour benches, about levelling up. Yeah. And they thought, oh, it's just a catchphrase, it doesn't mean anything, whatever. But it gave purpose and identity and direction. And, we just don't have that at the moment. And then that leaves a vacuum. And, as I'm sure we'll go on to discuss, on the world stage. Yeah. You need decisions. You need leadership. You can't just always go, middle management, managerialism.
Yeah,
it doesn't inspire.
And that's what we've got at the moment, isn't it? I mean, we're going to play the clip a little later on of Mr. Starmer turning on the Christmas tree. You might have heard it, Oscar. I'm not sure, but he does.
Unfortunately, it was painful listening.
Yeah, I don't know how you can mess up a countdown from 5 to 1, but he managed to just make a very exciting moment sound like the last place on planet Earth you wanted to be was outside Downing Street with the Christmas lights going on, which should be the very opposite to that. But he managed to pull it off with aplomb, made Christmas sound like the dullest thing on the planet at that point. However, he did give his speech, of course, and in that speech he emphasised that the United Kingdom won't kind of prioritise America over the EU or vice versa. Was that a correct move from his point of view?
In fairness, there are a lot of geopolitical, jigsaw pieces completely up in the air at the moment. Before Trump officially takes office in January, we're seeing real weakness and political frailties in European powers like Germany and France. The war in Ukraine is at an absolutely acute moment in time. And so I can see during his talk last night where he just wanted to tread that middle ground, not make any rash statements or decisions. But again, that is all very well and good in this moment of time. And he can probably get away with that. But let's say there is, a tariff war, for want of a better phrase, between America and the EU. He's going to have to make a decision at that point in terms of how he steers the UK forward.
Yeah.
And so he's probably got, it's quite symptomatic of him as a leader, I would say, last night. It is, maybe relatively just about right in terms of the ballpark of sentiment, but no detail, no substance. And I think left the room feeling none the wiser as to where we head as a nation on the world stage. Let's not forget, Ian, just very quickly, I think we talked about it last time I was on.
Yes.
Starmer doesn't really like being in the UK that much. He spent 14 visits since he's been PM outside of the nation that voted him in. And a lot of the world leaders and a lot of leadership around the world have briefed out, which is really interesting, this point. They're still none the wiser as to what type of leader he is. And considering he spent so much time out there, for the UK to still not really have a new identity about it and impact on the world stage is it's not a good place to be.
Not really, is it? And he doesn't sit. I don't know. I don't think he's a natural politician as well. And I didn't have quite as an emphatic a view on that when he was leader of the opposition. But as we all know, there's a huge chasm between just being an MP and being the Prime Minister. Is absolutely vital. Even being a senior cabinet minister and being the Prime Minister, there's a big old gap there, and at the moment he's certainly not filling it. Let's move to this story. Labour could cap political donations to 100,000 quid. This is all reference, Oscar, the Elon Musk story. Apparently wants to give Nigel Farage a squillion quid to bankroll the Reform UK party. Would that be why Labour might cap it, or would they have other reasons why they think this is the right thing to do?
Be a coincidence rather than conspiracy. I mean, without a doubt, the Reform Party are a huge threat to the Labour government. I mean, we talk about charisma and identity and leadership and direction and agenda setting. Reform have got that in absolute bucket loads. So I can see why potentially someone like Elon is looking at Nigel, obviously with the relationship that Nigel has had with Trump for years, and thinking, hang on a minute, maybe that's another area in which I can support. However, I do think it is probably not conspiracy. This is something that Labour, they like to talk about. It's their way of almost virtue signalling in terms of, transparency and how government should be properly done and funded. Yeah. I mean, I, as we all know, the Labour Party benefited hugely from, if you like, the market moving away from Rishi and the Conservative Party after 14 years and backing Labour. So I doubt we'll see too much out of this in terms of substantive kind of cleaning up, as Labour would put it, of donations. But the Elon thing is interesting. And even Elon aside, the media commentary, kind of armchair political fans, as I would call them, people who don't pay attention to Westminster every single day of their lives because they actually have a life. I know you and me do as well, Ian. Don't get me wrong.
Sort of.
But they're picking up on that reform momentum as well. And Farage with a bit of wind behind his sails. I mean, if you're Keir Starmer, and in fairness, the Conservative Party, that is something you are really concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. Worth looking at this story as well. Labour have set up 67 reviews and task forces. Instead of actually announcing solid policy, let's set up a review. Let's set up a task force. Let's have a quango. Let's get a committee going. I knew they were going to have a PhD in this territory. I mean, all governments do set up some task forces. This absolutely runs through the DNA of the Labour Party. Let's have another task force. I bet there's more quangos than there were half an hour ago in Whitehall, but that's what they're doing, it seems, Oscar.
Ian, you absolutely nailed it. This is just in the DNA. And I know people might think, oh, well, it's not a huge scandal. Who cares? A few talking shops here, a few talking shops there and quangos. But people need to remember that we pay for this. You know, this is our money that ultimately is used in terms of the salaries, the government time, what should be being done elsewhere. And so that people should be really, really concerned and frustrated about this. Sometimes it is right. Let's not throw the baby out of the bathwater. We do need to take stock, consider, consult, take opinions on really important policy. But honestly, some of the examples of this, particularly, junk food advertising and all that kind of stuff, it is completely painful, and it is symptomatic of what we've been talking about today. That middleman, managerial, blah, grey sludge, no direction, and kind of instinct, political instinct. When a leader can see and feel how the country feels about an issue.
100%. That's the bit that's missing.
Yeah, it's just not there. And there are others that do have that quality. So, if the voters feel as though nothing's happening and nothing's getting done, there will be certain leaders out there who probably look to take advantage of that.
I think so. Oscar, thank you for your time as ever. That's Oscar Reddrop, former special advisor to Boris Johnson when he was the Prime Minister. So he was there at the coalface of some of those big decisions. That was an interesting time, wasn't it? Man alive. That was interesting. A friend of mine worked for another Prime Minister, I'll just put it like that, and he said it was extraordinary. He would be on those phone calls with, like, Trump and people like that, like, listening in like you have to. I remember saying to him, well, give us, what was said. He said, I can't tell you. He never has. That's how it works. That's the loyalty to the crown, if you like, not necessarily to the office of Prime Minister. Listen, we've got to mention Keir Starmer, because we talked about the moment outside Downing Street a little earlier. If you haven't seen or heard this, I've got to play this to you. So every year, around about this time, the Prime Minister of the day turns on the Christmas tree outside Downing Street. They have a big Christmas tree outside the big black door, the big shiny door of number 10. And they usually invite some, a bit of a choir and some kids to come along. And the Prime Minister goes out and says, good evening, everybody, and, I'm going to turn the lights on. Here we go. Let's give it large. And bang, presses the button and the lights go on. Now, this is a moment where the Prime Minister can be seen as a little bit more human, a little bit more accessible, a bit more fun, away from the troubles of day-to-day prime ministerial life. You're not having to make a big decision. You're not in a cabinet meeting. You're not on the phone to Zelensky. You can just chill out a little bit and make it fun, like a chilled-out entertainer might do. But how many political leaders have it within their DNA to kind of, impart that sort of festive fun thing? Well, this was Keir Starmer's first attempt to be a fun Christmas leader when he turned on the lights outside number 10. I am going to give a little warning here. For those of you in a nervous disposition, you might want to switch off now and come back in around about 10 seconds' time. For those of you that know the true meaning of the word cringe, you might also want to prepare yourself with maybe some earmuffs or just hide behind a cushion. Here is the Prime Minister going entertainment crazy as he lays it on big time to turn on the Downing Street Christmas lights. Go, Keir.
Could you please join me when I say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay! It worked. Nervous moment there, but it's all good.
Oh, God. I literally, during that clip, started to eat my own elbows. Oh, 5, 2, 1. Nervous moment there. Oh, everything about it was horrendous. But there we are. The lights are now on. Thank you to